Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be suspended and that I be recognized.
Without objection, the Senator of Arizona will be recognized.
Mr. President, today I am pleased to be joined by Senator Reid of Nevada to introduce our distinguished Majority Leader, to introduce the Professional Boxing Amendments Act of 2012. This legislation is virtually identical to a measure reported by the Commerce Committee during the 111th Congress after being approved unanimously by the Senate in 2005. Simply put, this legislation would better protect professional boxing from the fraud, corruption, and ineffective regulation that has plagued the sport for too many years and that has devastated physically and financially many of our nation's professional boxers. My involvement with boxing goes back a long way, first as a fan in my youth and what many view as a golden age of boxing in America, in the days of Joe Louis and Billy Conn and Floyd Patterson and Sugar Ray Robinson, probably the greatest boxer in history, and Kid Gavilan and Joey Giardello, and the names I still remember because of the incredible acts of sportsmanship and courage and tenacity in the ring that they displayed, which made boxing a sport that one of the most popular of all in the United States. My undistinguished record as a boxer at the United States Naval Academy, and then over my time here in Congress, I've been involved in legislation related to boxing since the mid-1990s. The 19th century sports writer Pierce Egan called the sport of boxing the sweet science. Longtime boxing reporter Jimmy Cannon called it the red light district of sports. In truth, it's both. I've always believed that at its best, professional boxing is a riveting and honorable contest of courageous and highly skilled athletes. Unfortunately, the last few decades of boxing history has, through countless examples of conflicts of interest, improper financial arrangements, and inadequate or non-existent oversight, led most to believe that Cannon's words that boxing is the red light district of sports were more appropriate than that of Pierce Egan, who called it the sweet science. The most recent controversy surrounding the Pacquiao-Bradley fight is the latest example of the legitimate distrust boxing fans have for the integrity of the sport. After the Pacquiao-Bradley decision was announced, understandably, fans were clearly apoplectic, and many commentators found the decision astonishing. Bob Arum, the promoter of the fight, and he represented both Pacquiao and Bradley, said, quote, "What the hell were these people watching? How can you watch a sport where you don't see any motive for any malfeasance and yet come up with a result like we came up with tonight? How do you explain it to anybody? Something like this is so outlandish, it's a death knell for the sport. Those words came from the promoter of the fight, longtime promoter Bob Arum. ESPN boxing analyst Don Raphael, who scored the fight 119-9 for Pacquiao, called the decision, quote, an absolute absurdity. And he said, I could watch the fight 1,000 times and not find 7 rounds to give to Timothy Bradley. Additionally, following the fight, HBO's Max Kellerman, a guy I've always enjoyed, he was ringside where he said, quote, this is baffling. Punch that had Pacquiao landing more punches, landing at a higher connect percentage, landing more power punches. Ringside, virtually every reporter had Pacquiao winning by a wide margin. I can't understand how Bradley gets this decision. There were times in that fight where I felt a little embarrassed for Bradley. Clearly, the conspiracy theories and speculation surrounding the fight are given life because there are so many questions surrounding the integrity of the sport and how it is managed in multiple jurisdictions. Professional boxing remains the only major sport in the United States that does not have a strong, centralized association, league, or other regulatory body to establish and enforce uniform rules and practices. Because a powerful few benefit greatly from the current system of patchwork compliance and enforcement of federal boxing law, a national self-regulating organization, though preferable to government oversight, is not a realistic option. What has happened to the meaning of the word champion? There's an alphabet soup of organizations today, some of them, or many of them, based outside of the United States of America, who clearly manipulate the rankings in order to set up a fight which has a, quote, championship associated with it. Ineffective oversight of professional boxing will continue to result in scandals, controversies, unethical practices, a lack of trust in the integrity of judged outcomes, and most tragic of all, unnecessary deaths in the sport. These problems have led many in professional boxing to conclude that the only solution is an effective and accountable federal boxing commission. The legislation that Senator Reid and I are introducing would establish a United States Boxing Commission, USBC, or commission, providing the much-needed oversight to ensure integrity within this profession through better reporting and disclosure, requiring that the sport avoid the conflict of interest which causes fans to question the outcome of bouts, which hurts the sport. If enacted, the commission would administer federal boxing law and coordinate with other federal regulatory agencies to ensure that this law is enforced, oversee all professional boxing matches in the United States, and work with the boxing industry and local commissions to improve the safety, integrity, and professionalism of professional boxing in the United States. More specifically, this legislation would require that all referees and judges participating in a championship or a professional bout lasting 10 rounds or more be fully registered and licensed for the commission. Further, while a sanctioning organization could provide a list of judges and referees deemed qualified, only the Boxing Commission will appoint the judges and referees participating in these matches. Additionally, the commission would license boxers, promoters, managers, and sanctioning organizations. The commission would have the authority to revoke such a license for violations of federal boxing law, to stop unethical or illegal conduct, to protect the health and safety of a boxer, or if the revocation is otherwise in the public interest. The Professional Boxing Amendments Act would strengthen existing federal boxing law by improving the basic health and safety standards for professional boxers, establishing a centralized medical registry to be used by local commissions to protect boxers, reducing the arbitrary practices of sanctioning organizations, and enhancing the uniformity and basic standards for professional boxing contracts. Most importantly, this legislation would establish a federal regulatory entity to oversee professional boxing and set basic uniform standards for certain aspects of the sport. Thankfully, current law that we passed in the 90s has already improved some aspects of the state of professional boxing. However, like me, many others remain concerned the sport continues to be at serious risk. In 2003, the Government Accountability Office spent more than 6 months studying 10 of the country's busiest state and tribal boxing commissions. Government auditors found that many of these commissions do not comply with federal boxing law and that there is a disturbing lack of enforcement by both federal and state officials. It's important to state clearly and plainly for the record that the purpose of the commission created by this bill is not to interfere with the daily operations of state and tribal boxing commissions. Instead, it would work in consultation with local commissions, and it would only exercise its authority when reasonable grounds exist for such intervention. In fact, this bill states explicitly that it would not prohibit any boxing commission from exercising any of its powers, duties, or functions with respect to the regulation or supervision of professional boxing to the extent not consistent with the provisions of federal boxing law. With respect to costs associated with this legislation, the price tag for this legislation should not fall on the shoulders of the American taxpayer, especially during a time of crushing debts and deficits. As such, to cover the costs, the bill authorizes the Commission to assess fees on promoters, sanctioning organizations, and boxers, ensuring that boxers pay the smallest portion of what is in fact collected. Let there be no doubt, however, of the very basic and pressing need in professional boxing for a federal boxing commission. The establishment of the USBC would address that need. The problems that have plagued the sport of professional boxing for many years continue to undermine the credibility of the sport in the eyes of the public and, more importantly, compromise the safety of boxers. This bill provides an effective approach to curbing these problems. Mr. President, I take a back seat to no one in my desire for smaller government and less regulation. It is a crying need today, not only for the integrity of the sport, but the health of boxers. We are finding more and more, especially in the sport of professional football lately, the effect of blows to the head. Anyone who's had the honor of knowing Muhammad Ali, as I have over the years, recognizes that this is a very, very brutal sport. And there's no doubt that if in professional football blows to the head can be damaging to one's health, clearly that can be in the sport of boxing. I regret to tell my colleagues that there is not sufficient protections for the safety of the boxers engaged in the sport today. The Pacquiao-Bradley fight is only the latest example, and its only outrage is spread because of the size of the fight. Unfortunately, over the years, there have been a series of fights. Some of them I will add for the record at the appropriate time, where the wrong decision has been announced. This is a great sport. This is given an opportunity for young men, particularly, to rise from the depths of poverty to pinnacles of greatness in this sport and wealth beyond their imagining at the time they entered the sport. So we need to protect these people. We need to give them what a fair and legitimate playing field in which to compete. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues, I want to again thank my friend, the Majority Leader, Senator Harry Reid, who was a boxer of great skill and ability himself in his younger days. Some of those traits he has displayed very prominently here on the floor of the Senate, and I respect him greatly. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Iowa.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Mary Geiger Lewis of South Carolina to be United States District Judge.
Under the previous order, there will be 30 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President, I should probably defer to the chairman of the committee. Go ahead.
Mr. President.
I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I thank my friend from Iowa. Obviously, if he had a schedule I had to go, I would yield to him. But I think seeing him on the floor, I know that the Senate Republicans announced last week they're going to shut down and block the confirmation process for qualified and consensus circuit nominees for the rest of the year. That's unfortunate. It does nothing to help the American people or our courts. Our courts continue to be overburdened, while consensus nominees for vacancies that could be filled are being stalled. I'm talking about, in some cases, nominees where you have 2 Republican senators from the state supporting them. Others where you got a Democratic and a Republican senator who've gone through our committee, usually by voice vote. They're that non-controversial. And it's hard to see how this new application of the Thurmond Rule is really anything more than another name for the stalling tactics that we've already seen for months and years. I've yet to hear any good reason why we should not continue to vote on well-qualified consensus nominees, just as we did up until September of the last 2 presidential election years when we had a Republican president. That was supported by both Democrats and Republicans to vote up through September. I've yet to hear a good explanation why we can't work to solve the problem of high vacancies for the American people. So I'll continue to work with the Senate leadership to try to confirm as many of President Obama's qualified judicial nominees as possible, because I hear from judges all over the country how these judicial vacancies are burdening our courts, and American taxpayers are unable to get a court to hear their cases. Now, I was heartened to see that the senior senator from Maine has said that she'll continue to work with the bipartisan Senate leadership in an effort to bring the Maine nominee to the First Circuit before the Senate for a confirmation vote. And I trust that the many Republican senators who joined Senator Kyle and Senator McCain in opposing the filibuster of Justice Hurwitz will now join to oppose the filibusters of William Kayada of Maine, Judge Robert Bachrach of Oklahoma, Judge Schwartz of New Jersey, and Richard Toronto for the Federal Circuit. And I hope that the senators from South Carolina, whose state's nominee we consider today, will aid this effort, just as we worked with them throughout the process to ensure they were consulted by the President. In fact, I personally requested the President to consult with Republican senators when they're going to have a nominee from their home states. But I hope they're going to show that same courtesy to other senators. I think this pattern of obstruction, and I say this more out of sadness than anything else, has been as transparent as the Senate Republicans' leader's statement that the single most important thing Senate Republicans want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Now, I fully expect them, of course, to support their Republican nominee for president. But as they obstructed his qualified judicial nominees, they've also rejected virtually every effort this president has made to improve the economy and to create jobs. And they've become the party of no. No help for the American people, no to jobs, no to economic recovery, no to police, firefighters, and teachers, no to students seeking help to pay for their education, no to consumer protection, no to assisting state and local governments, No to the highway bill. No to any more judges. And I think the obstruction of judicial nomination is just one more example of Republicans saying no or simply going slow, as they have to the police, the firefighters, the teachers, the students, the consumer protection of those 50 states that want to go forward with highway bills. Now, I know Vermonters, and I hear from Vermonters, Republicans, and Democrats alike, they can't wait while politics trump sound policy efforts here in Washington. It's time for a reality check. While our economy has shown some signs of progress since the economic collapse of 4 years ago, there's no doubt domestic job growth has not been as strong as we had hoped. Even though we have under 5% unemployment in Vermont, we still have too many Vermonters looking for work. We have to continue looking for ways to spur job growth and economic investment in this country. But efforts in Congress to increase jobs, to reduce unemployment, to support hardworking American families struggling to keep food on their table and roofs over their heads, meet with partisan obstruction too. While Congress delays, the clock's ticking down for the millions of Americans struggling to afford college, those struggling to pay back student loans once they graduate. In less than 2 weeks, millions of jobs will be put on hold when critical transportation programs, including funding for the Highway Trust Fund, expire. Failing to pass a long-term transportation bill jeopardizes thousands of construction development projects impacting millions of jobs in every single state in this country. In a little over a month, important legislation to extend the National Flood Insurance Program will expire. Failure to reauthorize this important program puts at risk the sale of thousands of homes at a time when our housing market is still trying to recover. And meanwhile, in this election year, Republicans in Congress are more intent on extending the Bush-era tax cuts that contributed to the financial crisis facing us today than working together to move toward reasonable policies to bolster economic growth. I know I raised the question at the time when Congress voted to go to war in Iraq, a war that I voted against. But they're going to do it by borrowing the money. The same in Afghanistan. Never before in this nation have we gone to war and borrowed the money. We've had a tax to pay for it. So we lose $1 trillion in Iraq and at least $500 billion so far in Afghanistan. Now, if you want to cast partisan politics aside, if you want to have consensus on meaningful jobs and job preservation legislation, we can do so. We've shown how we did it. The Leahy-Smith American Invents Act is one of the best examples of laws enacted in this Congress to promote our American economy and create American jobs. The Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, I in the Senate, brought together Republicans and Democrats, both bodies. We passed the Leahy-Smith American Invents Act. Unfortunately, it's one of only a few job-creating bills enacted in this Congress. So I'm disheartened to hear Republican leaders in Congress say they were simply done legislating for the year. Reality check is the Vermonters and Americans of all states can't wait. President Obama has signaled his commitment to moving forward with job-creating legislation to get Americans back to work. To protect America's leadership in the global marketplace, we should move on that. Let the two candidates for president argue, let them state their position, let the voters decide which one they want to vote for. But in the meantime, when we have legislation to put Americans to work, let's put the politics aside, focus on the right policy, on the needs of the American people. Let's all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike, act on behalf of the people who sent us here. It's really past time for the games to end and the work to begin. Mr. President, I ask my whole statement be made part of the record.
Without objection.
And I suggest the absence of quorum and ask consent the time be equally divided.
Without objection. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Okonga. The Senate now is considering the nomination of Mary Geiger Lewis to be a U.S. District Judge in South Carolina. A roll call vote on confirmation of this nomination is expected in about 15 minutes at 5:30. Ms. Lewis was born in Columbia, South Carolina. She received a Bachelor of Arts from Clemson University in 1980 and a Juris Doctor from the University of South Carolina School of Law in 1984. She worked as a law clerk to South Carolina Judge Owens Taylor Cobb from 1984 to 1985, and since 1985 she has worked at Lewis and Babcock LLP, starting as an associate in 85 and then becoming a partner in 87. Representative Jim Clyburn, House Assistant Minority Leader, recommended Ms. Lewis to fill a judicial vacancy on the United States District Court for the District of South Carolina. On March 16, 2011, President Obama formally nominated her. Quick news update while we're waiting for senators to speak. President Obama is at the G20 summit in Los Cabos, Mexico today. He says that he's confident that tensions between the United States and Russia can be worked out. He had a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and said the two leaders agreed on the need to build on areas where they have had success, quote, even though there are areas of disagreement. President Obama says that the U.S. and Russia agree that a political process needs to be created in Syria in order to prevent civil war. And speaking of Syria, the AP reports that in case it's necessary, Russia is getting a unit of Marines in place to protect Russian citizens in Syria and evacuate them safely from the country. According to a Russian news agency, 2 Navy ships will be taking the Russian Marines to Syria. In addition to protecting Russian citizens, they'll also be safeguarding a Russian military base there. The move may reflect growing concern about the future of President Bashar Assad, a Russian ally. That's from the Associated Press.
Chairman.
Senator from Montana,
I would ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
without objection.
I would ask that all time be yielded back.
Is there objection? Without objection, all time is yielded back.
And I would ask for the ayes and nays.
The question is whether the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. DeMint. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenborough. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall, Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Alexander, Ayotte, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Collins, Conrad, Coons, Franken, Gillibrand, Graham, Inouye, Johnson of South Dakota, Kerry, Cole, Leahy, Lieberman, Lugar, Manchin, Nelson of Nebraska, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Sanders, Snow, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Webb, Wicker, Wyden. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Cochran, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Burr, Coburn, DeMint, Inhofe, Johans, Hall, Roberts, Sessions. Mr. Isaacson, no. Mr. Merkley, aye. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Hatch, no. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Portman, no. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Enzi, Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Ms. Markowski, aye. Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Kyle, no. Mr. Crapo, no. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Chambliss, no. Mr. Begich, aye. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Risch, no. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Cornyn, no. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Yes. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates, no. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mrs. Hutchison. Mrs. Hutchison, aye.